Well, hello, Dr. Adams. Welcome to our podcast. Why don't you introduce yourself to our guests? Tell us what you do, what your work is.
Awesome. I'm so happy to be here. I'm Dr. Amanda Adams. I am the Director of Research Coordination at Bat Conservation International, and I'm also an adjunct faculty member at Texas A&M in the Department of Biology, and I study bats. So I've been studying bats for about almost 20 years now.
Really?
Crazy to say.
You don't look old enough to be studying anything for 20
Thank
years.
you. Thank you. And I specialize in bioacoustics. I love studying their echolocation and behavior and ecology, and then how to conserve them and save them.
Nice. So bioacoustics, that's been your focus.
Yep. I've been working on their acoustics for a long time. Yeah.
That's neat. I bet you could spend an entire career on that because, I mean, is there a lot known about that, or is it kind of?
It is one of the kind of the main special routes within studying bats,
Really?
since their echolocation is so unique and powerful, and there's so many questions. It's like an endless. My PhD advisor used to say it's the gift that keeps on giving. So
Really?
just endless questions and things that we can learn about their echolocation and how they do it and how they see the world with echolocation, but then also in the ways that we can use their echolocation to study them and understand them, and then use it for our own purposes and things like sonar. And yeah,
That's so neat.
it's fun.
I actually have like a little side question already, just
Great.
off of like what you said there. From an evolutionary standpoint, like comparing bat sonar to like the sonar that we see in some marine mammals, how similar is that? Like, did they evolve? Like, they all have a common ancestor that happened to have some sort of echolocation.
Ooh.
It diverged, or is this something like convergent to where it evolved separately multiple times?
Amazing question. Yeah, no, it's a wonderful example of convergent evolution. So they don't have common ancestors that were able to echolocate. They evolved that. They both groups evolved that separately, which is just incredible. And so that's called active sensing. So it's sending energy out into the environment, and then it's sensing the environment with self-generated energy instead of all of our senses are passive sensing. So it's pretty unique. Yeah.
That's very cool. Great question. I'm glad you asked that. That is amazing that different lines of organisms would develop that on their own. Super cool.
Power of sound.
Yeah, right. So another thing that bats are good at is pollinating plants.
Yes.
But I think they're maybe a little bit overlooked as far as pollinators are concerned. Can you tell us how important they are as pollinators?
Sure. So one of the really, really fun things about bats is how diverse they are. And within that diversity, there's over 1,400 species of bats in the world. And in the United States, we have about 45, 47 species. And almost all of our bats in the US are insectivorous bats. Okay. So there are a few species that will come up into the southern tips of the country. So the southern bits of Texas will get a couple pollinating species. The Southwest and into like Southern California will get some pollinating species. And they are remarkable. They're like the hummingbirds of the night. They'll specialize on particular plants. There are plants that we wouldn't have if it weren't for bat pollinators. So the most famous one in my book, or the most important, is tequila. We wouldn't have tequila if it weren't for bats. So, I mean,
wow.
Now, like, what else is there to say?
Right.
So bats pollinate the tequila agave in the Southwest area. And there's a whole bunch of other plants like that are really economically important around the globe. So durian is the world's stinkiest fruit, but also a very economically important fruit in Southeast Asia, and bats pollinate that plant, so we wouldn't have durian if it weren't for that. There's a whole cookbook that of plants, recipes with plants that are pollinated by bats. It's fun,
That's
but
pretty
they're
neat.
really important.
So agave and tequila.
Yeah.
Another bat gift that keeps on giving, right?
Exactly.
And so this seems like a little bit of a dumb question, but I'm going to ask it anyway. That's kind of my thing. Are all of those guys, are they all night blooming plants, or do any of them work during the day?
Pretty much no.
Okay.
There are some like if you go to Australia and you can see big flying foxes, like these big fruit bats hanging out in the trees, and they like are kind of squawking at each other, and they'll be
Yeah.
very kind of active during the day, but that's just because they don't sleep well. Like they're out flying around doing their thing at night. So all bats are nocturnal. The plants that they're pollinating are night blooming, or staying open
Staying.
throughout the night. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Not a dumb question though.
Well, I just wondered, but I love those flying foxes. I was a zookeeper during grad school, and I got to take care of some of them, and they were just so much fun. One of them was not fun. He was kind of mean, but whatever. The others were fun.
The sky puppies.
Yeah.
Sky puppies.
So I've kind of been reading that there's been a growing problem in the recent decades for the bats in the US with an issue called white nose syndrome. Do you think you could tell us a little bit about white nose syndrome, please?
Yes, it's really depressing. So it is, white nose syndrome is caused by a fungus, Pseudogymnoascus destructans. We just call it PD because that's a mouthful. And this fungus arrived in the US in about 2006 in a cave in New York. And by 2007, that colony was decimated, carpets of dead bats on the ground. And it took a really long time to even identify the fungus, name it, figure out the mechanism of why these bats were dead in this cave. And in that time, that fungus spread across the US. And so today it is in almost every state from coast to coast, and even out to California. And it's in particular killing and affecting hibernating bats. So it's this fungus is cold loving, so it lives in caves. And when the bats go in to hibernate for the winter, they're getting infected by this fungus. It starts growing on them, kind of feeding on their skin. And so then they're getting itchy, they're losing water. And because of this, the effect of this fungus, they're waking up more during the winter, and they're getting dehydrated, and they're burning through their fat stores too fast to survive the winter. So for a long time, we thought that it was just going to stay in like the parts of the country that had like real winter. So, like we thought Texas, like why would it come down to Texas where we don't have real winters? Not
Right.
usually. But that's not the case. Like I said, it's spread from coast to coast. It's in Canada. And like in Texas, I wrote down, it's in 37 counties in Texas now. So Texas was really good at monitoring early on. So started monitoring in 2011 and got the first positive sample for PD, the fungus, in 2017. And now there's 37 counties that have the fungus. And the main bat here that's being affected by it is cave myotis, this cute little guy that lives in caves here. And in the US broadly, there's 2 species that were just proposed for emergency endangered listings. The northern long-eared bat and tricolored bat were both proposed as endangered because of white nose syndrome. So like some of our most common bats are now endangered. It's really heartbreaking. Yeah.
That is sad. Did it, so it came from another country, another continent?
Yep. So it came from Eurasia. So it's really interesting that they're the same fungus after we found it in the US was identified in caves in Europe and Asia. But the idea is that that fungus is native there. So the bats have adapted to it, evolved with it over thousands, hundreds of thousands of years. And so they've been they're able to survive with it now.
Yeah. Is there any hope? I mean, for
There's one species in the US that we think there's a paper out that shows that there might be some signs of adapting to it. But kind of the issue with those species that were listed as endangered, like their colonies have collapsed by over 90%. One of those species, the colonies have declined by 99%, that they just don't have time to adapt, even if they physically were capable of it. Yeah.
So I have another little side question. So I'm sure, a majority of the populations we're talking about are wild populations of bats. Is this treatable in captive populations? Has there been any captive populations that have we've been able to monitor the progress of this in a controlled environment?
Yeah, there's, and this is what's actually the most frustrating part is there's been some really promising kind of treatments for it in lab settings. So being able to kill the fungus in a petri dish, being able to treat bats in captivity and keep them alive through the winter, and they'll go, but they're not scalable to this point. So there hasn't been anything that's come out that has been successful at being able to go and treat an entire colony. There's trials of things going on right now, but a lot of the research now that we're, over a decade into this, is really focusing on how do we support the survivors. People are still working on how to get rid of the fungus, but it's more how do we help the bats survive the fungus and just accept that it's part of our environment now.
Yeah. Wow. Well, that is depressing.
I know.
Sorry. So yeah, so just continue to monitor and continue to work on things.
Yeah, so there's still a lot of work going on, and just knowing where it is, how populations are doing. So a lot of it is continuing to monitor bat populations around the US and Canada. And I mean, there's been some really good things have come out of it. So the North American Bat Monitoring Program is a project that basically was spurred because of white nose syndrome and needing to know the status and trends of bat populations around North America because of the impact of white nose syndrome and not knowing that when it first hit. And so now we have this amazing program that has standardized methodology, and it's housed at USGS. And now we have a much better idea of what is going on with our bat populations, those that are affected by white nose syndrome and others as well.
Okay. Well, that's
There's
a good thing.
silver lining.
Right. Let's change the subject a little bit.
Yeah, bring it up a notch.
Yeah. Yeah, let's do. We love our spooky culture, scary movies, all of that stuff. And there are so many myths about vampire bats. And I've been hearing that vampire bats are moving into Texas. I don't even know if that's true. So is that true? Are they here? Are they moving here? What's going on?
Yeah, so vampire bats, the probably the world's most famous bat.
Yeah.
Of the 1,400 species of bats in the world, there are 3 species that drink blood. So there are 3 vampire bats. two I've never seen. They're very kind of cryptic and rare. And then there's one that is aptly named the common vampire bat, Desmodus rotundus. And this common vampire bat is common, and its home range right now is limited to South and Central America and up into Mexico. So as of yet, its range does not extend into Texas or to the US anywhere. So we do not have vampire bats.
Okay. Good to know.
That being said, the common vampire bat is doing very well in the world, and its range is expanding north. So there are efforts to monitor when they extend into the southern tip of Texas, but it hasn't happened yet that I've heard of.
Okay.
Yeah.
So how big a deal are vampire bats for, like, for your livestock, for pets, for people too? I mean, would they bite a human if they had the opportunity, and is it a big deal?
I think that's the key, if they had the opportunity. So they will feed on any mammal blood.
Okay.
But they're gonna go for the easy stuff first, like a giant cow lazily standing in a field is a much better resource than humans tucked under blankets in a house, in a room. So it's more like if the opportunity presents itself, like if you're sleeping out in the middle of a field, not in a tent, then maybe. But still, even that, you're less of a target than a big old cow or something.
Sure.
But so yes, they technically would drink human blood, but it's pretty rare. And they are, I mean, any sort of interaction between organisms with blood, there's a risk of disease transmission.
Yeah.
So, and with all mammals, we are also susceptible to rabies. So just like a dog can have rabies, bat can have rabies, a human can have rabies. So when they're feeding on blood, there is that increased chance of rabies transmission, but it's actually very rare, very uncommon in bats, and especially like healthy bats that are out flying around doing their thing. Then there's also a lower chance that they're going to be sick. But obviously you don't want anything messing with your blood. And the same thing for livestock and pets. So vampire bats typically will only drink about a tablespoon of blood a night. So they're not going to be draining anything, right? Like nothing.
Sure.
Organisms aren't dying of blood loss from vampire bats.
Right.
Unless they're like already really sick, I guess.
Sure.
But,
okay.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's more like like you said, the creepy factor. Like I love bats, and I definitely wouldn't want a vampire bat feeding on me. So it's more the mental thing than it actually being a true risk.
Sure.
I think most farmers are going to, it's more of an annoyance.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense.
So if I understand you correctly, we should all panic.
Yes, that's what I said. No. No. I would say if you go, and even it's funny, like vampire bats are really cute. They have very sweet little faces, but then even if you Google vampire bat, like the pictures of them are like
they have blood hanging off their
head. They make them scary, like but they're tiny, they're like this big. They're like like 4 inches long. Like they're not big.
Wasn't there like a couple of months ago, there was like a video on all over social media of a little guy. Was it capybara?
The capybaras. They were chasing capybaras.
Capybaras walking.
Oh my gosh, I have not seen that.
You gotta look it up. It's the cutest little thing because it looks like a frog following along after him.
Yeah, they're so cool. Like most like bats are meant to be in the air, not on the ground.
Right.
But vampire bats have evolved they're like the best on the ground. They have like bigger thumbs, and the way they move, you got to look up the video of the vampire bat on a vampire bat sized treadmill. They can run. It's crazy. They
Really?
can get up to 2.5 miles per hour,
Yeah. Well,
which
the
is
little,
insane.
yeah, that is funny. Yeah, you got to look at for the video with the
I
capability
will.
because I kept watching it because at first I was like, that's a frog. That's a frog jumping along there. And then I was like, no, okay, it's a bat. That's cool.
That's awesome. Yeah.
Yeah,
They
it's super
move
cute.
unlike most bats.
Yeah. So
Super
were
cool.
you always interested in bats growing up? How'd you get into bats?
No, I wasn't actually. I always was into animals and mammals. I thought I wanted to be a zookeeper or just work with animals in some way. I didn't really know what that looked like or meant as a kid. I used to think I wanted to be like Jane Goodall and like study
Right.
primates. And so then I studied abroad in Costa Rica when I was an undergrad, and it changed my life. We did a night of catching bats, and then I was like, oh, that was cool. Like, got to actually like see an animal up close. And then I did my independent research project on bats, and yeah, I just kind of quickly got obsessed. I fell in love, and now like my life is bats all the time, and I wouldn't have it any other way. My dad thinks it's rebellion. The only way I thought about bats is he hated bats. Like, we would buy like rubber bats at Halloween to like make fun of him, and now I get given those every year, and I love it.
That's great. I love that.
It's just a phase.
Yeah, that's
Yeah,
right.
it's just the face she'll grow out of it. No, never.
That's funny.
So this is one of our more favorite questions we like to ask people. It's not our famous question, but it's our second most famous question. And
Okay.
what advice would you give to young people who are they would like to work with bats, or they'd like to do a similar career as yours? What advice would you give them?
I hope that there are people out there listening who want to become bat biologists. We need more people studying bats. I think one of the biggest things in science, one, is just networking, going out and meeting people doing interesting things that you might want to do, because it's really, you kind of hear about what they did, and then like anytime I meet someone, like I'll remember them and be like, oh, hey, I know this person who wants to do this. Oh, you're looking for a graduate student? Cool. I know this person who's looking to do that work. So a lot of it is just kind of getting out of your comfort zone and getting out and talking to people, not being afraid to say, oh, I want to do that, and trying things. I think going out and volunteering with different projects, getting involved in research at an early age. Like, now I have so many students who are doing amazing things in their first year of college, and I had no idea that was even an option.
Right.
Yeah,
Right, when I was an undergrad, I didn't know I could do undergrad research, and now
right.
we use undergrads all the time, and I'm like, you
I
guys,
know, and it's amazing.
uh,
Like, they're in undergrad doing what I was doing at the beginning of my PhD.
right, right.
So I think just putting yourself out there and asking questions is the biggest thing. Like, if you want to do something, ask, and usually you'll be surprised at the opportunities that can open up for you if you just put yourself out there and reach out and talk to people that are doing the things that you want to be doing.
That's really great advice. You got to put yourself out there and let people know that you're interested,
Yep.
or
And
nothing's
it's scary.
gonna come your way if you
Yeah,
don't.
exactly.
That's great advice. We love our biology blunder question, and so that's where we're at right now. I'm wondering,
Oh, geez.
working with bats probably has led to a couple of blunders. Do you have one that you'd like to share?
Yeah, lots things happen at night. I would say I was trying to think, what were the most entertaining. I think what really first comes to mind are the things that I catch in mist nets that aren't supposed to be in there.
Oh, really?
So we put up mist nets. They're the same types of nets that are used to catch birds, but we use them at night and they're practically invisible. Even humans can't see them. So I've caught a man on a bike.
I was gonna
once
say, have you ever caught a
in a
human?
net. We've actually had a truck drive through one not that long ago. That was disappointing.
Oh,
The worst though was I thought I was gonna catch a horse, but luckily we did not catch the horse. It ran right through and just tore a hole,
oh my
right
God.
hole in the net. So those are definitely the worst. We're catching things that were not bats. One time we were netting over a river, and this is up in Saskatchewan, Canada. And so it was the middle of summer, but it got like freezing and it was so cold. So we're like bundled up outside of the river, kind of waiting to check the net. And it's my turn to go check the net. And I go and look, and there's a great horned owl in the net. And I was like, oh no, I am not taking that out. I do not have the training for owls,
Right?
20 times the size of a bat. But luckily, as I was waiting for my coworker to come and help me, the owl managed to get itself out of the net, but it fell into the river.
Oh no.
And then, but he got out of the river really quickly and got up to the opposite bank of where I was. And I swear he just kind of like puffed up and like shook off all the water. And then he turned his head around and glared at me, and then like waddled into the grass on the other side. But I was not impressed.
That's
So
great.
it's all those in the net things that
Yeah.
shouldn't be in the net are really the biggest bat blunders. Lots of other stories with people, but
Yeah.
it's-
That bat was, or that owl was like, how rude.
yeah, so pissed.
Funny. So the man on the bike,
Oh my, he
What
also
was-
was not impressed.
what was his reaction?
I don't think he was sober. And this is all in Spanish, and we're like apologizing, and he's like grumbling and confused, and we just like are taking really the bike out of the net. He was not impressed either.
You got the same look that you got from the owl.
Exactly.
That's funny. Oh my gosh. I can't imagine putting up a mist net at night, what kind of things you might catch.
I mean, that had to be like a Men in Black type experience. Like all of a sudden you're just riding yourself home from the bar, and then you're on the ground and you can't move, and then lights come on and people in lab coats come out. I know you guys probably weren't in lab coats, but that's
No,
I'm picturing it in my mind.
Yeah.
Definitely a better image of that's probably what he felt like happened. Yeah. He probably tells that story very
I was
differently.
gonna say, I would love to hear his version of the story if he remembers that night at all. That's great. Is there anything else that you'd like to share with our audience about bats or your career or anything?
I think really just the opportunity to spread the word of how important bats are, and that they really need our protection and conservation, and that also involves protecting their habitats, and I guess keeping wildlife in their wild areas is best for their health and our health. So one of the big things that we are focusing on now is this concept of One Health, in that human health relies on healthy environments, and animal health relies on healthy environments. And so it's kind of these three facets: animal health, human health, and environmental health. And with all of that together is One Health. So we can't have one without the other.
Oh, that's such an excellent point. I love that. And we really didn't talk about it. All right. They're not so much doing pollinating here in Texas. What are they doing? What benefits do we get from bats?
Insects. They are eating so many insects. Yeah, I think every farmer out there should be thanking bats. In the Central Valley in California, farmers put up bat houses
Mhm.
for them, and they eat so many agricultural pests. They're the number one predator of nocturnal insects. They eat corn earworm moths, predators of or insect pests for pecans, all these key crops in Texas.
Mhm.
Bats are out eating those pests. So they're a huge, huge benefit environmentally and economically.
Mhm. Mhm. For growing food. So what about, are mosquitoes too small for them?
It's actually an active area of research.
Okay.
So bats will eat mosquitoes. Some of the main research on it came out of Australia. So it depends on the bat species. It's going to be a smaller bat that's going to
Sure.
want to eat that tiny, tiny, tiny mosquito.
Mhm.
I mean, I guess if you offered a bat a moth versus a mosquito, they would take the moth.
Sure.
It's like a steak versus a shrimp. But part of it is it's still a bit of an unknown, because how we used to do the diet analysis was to take bat guano and break it up under a light microscope and just look for fragments of insects. So you'd be like, oh, here's this part of a foot that belongs to a grasshopper.
Mhm.
Or something, like
Sure.
looking for fragments and identifying that to what the bat ate. So even if they ate a mosquito, there wouldn't be a whole lot coming
Right.
out the other end to identify.
That makes sense.
So now with molecular techniques, they are seeing mosquitoes, other dipterans in bat diets. And it's just the question of how much are they going to be the solution to knocking down mosquito populations? Probably not, but they
Mhm.
do eat them a little bit.
Sure. Sure. But putting a really big dent in the agricultural pests.
Yeah.
That's huge. Well, thank you so much for spending time with us today. I really enjoyed hearing your bat stories and learning all about bats.
Yeah, well, thank you for having me, Andrew, Sandra. So nice to meet you. And I guess there's always there's tons of resources out there. For those of you guys living in Texas, there's a lot of great sites to go out and watch bats.
Oh, yeah, tell me about
So Texas Parks and Wildlife Department has a website for the sites where you can go watch bats. And there's also a really cool site with a list of all of our bat species in Texas, batsoftexas.com. And then there's also a lot of resources on bats at batcon.org.
Okay, batcon.org
Yeah.
or batsoftexas.com. Is that a .com?
Yeah,
Nice.
got
Okay.
it.
We'll check those out. I
Cool.
appreciate it. All right. Well, thank you so much, and we'll talk to you later.
All right. Thanks, guys.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
And remember, don't feed the wildlife.
Talk on the Wild Side is a production of the Caesar Kleberg Wildlife Research Institute of Texas A&M University, Kingsville. Funding for this project is provided by the Harvey Wild Sportsman Conservationist Award by the Rotary Club of Corpus Christi. Editing was completed by the talented Gabby Olivas, Andrew Lowry, and Trey Kendall. We thank the TAMAC Distance Learning Lab for all their help and cooperation.